Have you ever found yourself just staring at a massive color-coded spreadsheet just to make like a totally standard life decision?
Oh, absolutely. Like way too many times to count.
Right. Like maybe you're trying to decide whether to switch jobs or rent a new apartment, and you've built this elaborate matrix of pros, cons, hypothetical risks.
You've got the 5-year projections all mapped out.
Exactly. You're just trying to optimize every single angle, totally terrified of making a suboptimal choice. And, it feels responsible. It feels like you're being smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the default setting for modern life. We're essentially trained to act as our own personal actuaries, calculating our lives down to the decimal point to guarantee safety before we take a single step forward.
But there is a very jarring question we are going to explore today. What if that specific obsession with playing it safe, like that endless calculation of risks, is actually the exact mechanism destroying your freedom?
It's a huge question. And to answer it, we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating, highly philosophical 2012 essay. It's by an author named Swifting, and it's titled Weighing Pros and Cons is Not the Way of Immortals.
The mission of our deep dive today is to explore this radical perspective on how our modern obsession with, intellectualizing everything might actually be ruining our true potential.
Right, the text offers a pretty severe critique of our whole optimization-obsessed culture. And I should note, while the author uses terms like immortals, God, and the Tao, we are going to examine this entirely as a philosophical framework today.
Yeah, we're looking at this as a psychological lens on the human condition. We are definitely not endorsing any specific theology or spiritual doctrine here. We're just impartially reporting on the text to unpack this really provocative worldview.
Exactly, we're just exploring the ideas in the source material, which basically suggests that our prized ability to intellectualize is actually a trap.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to even approach what the author means by an immortal, we first have to look at his baseline critique of how normal humans operate.
And that starts with our survival instincts.
Right. Our core assumption in society is that survival instincts are inherently good, right? We weigh the pros and cons to navigate toward the best outcome and avoid disaster.
Yeah, we always want to have our cake and eat it too. The text actually likens this to the ancient proverb of wanting both the fish and the bear's paw. We want to keep our feet in multiple boats so we never risk falling into the water.
And the author uses this really striking metaphor to describe this behavior. He says, even if we already own a perfectly functional raincoat, we still insist on carrying an umbrella around, just in case.
Just in case, right. We are so driven by this hypothetical fear of getting wet that we actively burden ourselves with redundant layers of protection.
And he takes us to a fascinating extreme. He suggests that if a literal immortal came down from some wonderland and offered to take us there immediately, our first response wouldn't even be joy.
No, it would be hesitation.
Yeah. We would just hesitate. We would assume the immortal is willing to just wait indefinitely while we run a quick risk analysis.
We'd be like, hold on, what's the healthcare system like in Wonderland?
Exactly. Like, can I sublet my current apartment just in case Wonderland doesn't pan out? We'd overthink the whole thing.
What's fascinating here is that the author isn't just attacking the idea of being prepared. He's really attacking the deep hesitation that it breeds.
The hidden cost of the raincoat and the umbrella?
Right, this constant looking left and right doesn't actually make us safer. It makes us stagnant. When your primary directive is to secure a backup plan for your backup plan, you become incredibly slow. You get paralyzed.
I have to challenge this, though. I mean, telling someone to just drop their umbrella sounds incredibly reckless in the real world.
Oh, sure, it sounds crazy at first.
Like, think about someone who is miserable in their corporate job and wants to start a business, right? They hesitate because they have a mortgage. Or they need the company health insurance for their kids' dental work.
Yeah, the dental insurance is always the trap.
Right. But that isn't some philosophical failing or a lack of spiritual bravery. That is just basic financial literacy. Why is the author painting basic preparation as this profound negative?
Because he views that quote-unquote literacy as an illusion of control. And that illusion carries a massive cognitive and spiritual tax.
A tax? How so?
Well, the author isn't merely attacking the existence of a savings account, He's attacking the deep, paralyzing hesitation that the risk assessment mindset forces on you.
Yeah.
Yes, you keep the health insurance, But at what internal cost?
You're just agonizing all day.
Exactly. You spend your days agonizing over the gap between where you are and where you want to be. You wear the raincoat, you carry the umbrella, and the physical reality is that you are sweating, exhausted, and barely able to walk.
Wow. So the obsession with the safest possible route consumes so much background processing power that you stop actually living today.
That's it, exactly. And that raincoat mentality doesn't just physically slow us down, it completely distorts our relationship with time.
Yeah, the essay moves into this idea that because we're perpetually calculating for a safe tomorrow, we completely abandon the present moment. The text is actually really blunt about this. It says, the past is gone, the future is unreachable.
It's a harsh reality check.
Mm.
We treat the present moment merely as a waiting room for a future that we're desperately trying to secure.
Right, but the author argues that deferring your life to tomorrow just makes tomorrow an illusion.
Yeah, because if your present is consumed by the stress of calculation, you are literally wiring your brain to only experience stress. Your future will arrive, and you'll just find brand new things to calculate.
It never ends. And he makes a really sobering point about the unpredictability of reality. He talks about, unforeseen weather, sudden fortune or misfortune. Life is incredibly short.
It really is.
You spend decades deferring your joy, optimizing your retirement portfolio, enduring a job you absolutely hate for some future payoff, and then a sudden illness or a market crash just wipes it out.
To hammer home how critical the present is, the text actually claims that a person's psychological and spiritual state at the exact moment of death is what determines their afterlife.
Which is intense. But whether you take that literally or metaphorically, the mechanism is basically the same, right? The present moment is the only terrain where life actually happens.
Right. Wasting it on hypothetical simulations of the future is essentially a form of slow suicide.
But wait, if planning for the future is a trap, then the natural extreme of that is just absolute hedonism, right? Like, if nothing matters and tomorrow is an illusion, I should just max out my credit cards, lay on the couch, and demand the universe provide for me.
But the author aggressively warns against that exact extreme. He explicitly states that you cannot expect pies to fall from the sky.
Okay, so no free lunch.
No free lunch at all. He writes that greedy, selfish, jealous, or angry people only find suffering. Furthermore, anyone who feels smug about getting something for nothing without engaging in actual hard work is actually squandering whatever past blessings they had.
They're planting seeds for future disaster.
Exactly. The universe, in this framework, actively punishes entitlement.
But this feels like a massive contradiction to me. Like, he's telling us we must abandon our obsession with securing tomorrow. But we also can't expect a free lunch, and we absolutely must work hard today.
It does sound paradoxical.
Right, because how do you work hard for something without calculating the outcome? Isn't the literal definition of work sacrificing the present for a future reward?
Well, it requires a fundamental rewiring of why we take action. The author is advocating for intense, focused labor in the present moment, but entirely divorced from the expectation of a future reward.
Interesting. Divorced from the reward.
Yeah, it's about the internal mechanism of the action. You do the work purely for the sake of the present.
Okay, give me an example of how that actually functions in real life.
Let's go back to your example of the miserable corporate job. The calculating mind does the spreadsheet today because it's terrified of being fired next Tuesday, or because it desperately wants a promotion next year.
Right, so the action is super heavy, loaded with anxiety.
Exactly, and it's dependent on a future you do not control. But in the author's framework, you do the spreadsheet today simply because the spreadsheet is in front of you. It is the task of the present moment.
Oh, wow.
The physical keystrokes are the exact same, but the mental prison is entirely gone.
So you clear the inbox because the emails are there, not because you think hitting inbox 0 will finally make your boss validate your existence.
You nailed it. When you work with an expectation of future gain, you're trapped in a transactional relationship with the universe. You are weighing pros and cons.
But when you work simply to engage with reality, the cognitive drag disappears. You're light.
Yes, and that lightness is what he considers the true state of an immortal, which actually brings us to arguably the most abrasive and challenging part of this entire essay.
Oh yeah, this part is wild. Because if the calculating, planning mind is the problem, then the people we typically revere in society are doing life completely wrong.
The author is uncompromising on this point. He targets the intellectual elite directly.
He makes this bold claim that extremely rational people completely lack spirituality. The term used in the text is lynxing.
Right. Spirituality or natural instinct.
Yeah. And he explicitly lists out who is disqualified from becoming an immortal. Philosophers. Disqualified.
You scientists, disqualified.
Shrewd individuals and people who think thrice before acting, entirely disqualified.
He is isolating anyone whose primary mode of engaging with reality is through abstract logic, conceptualization, and risk assessment.
He even calls out highly educated people who just chatter endlessly about theories but refuse to engage in physical creation or put those concepts into practice.
Not immortal material at all.
But wait, throwing out pure scientists and philosophers? He is basically discarding the entire Enlightenment. He's disqualifying anyone who uses critical thinking. I mean, that borders on dangerous anti-intellectualism.
It definitely strikes our modern ears that way. We view human intelligence and rationality as our greatest evolutionary triumphs, right?
Yeah, of course.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, let's look at the mechanism of why the author rejects them. To him, hyperrationality is not actually a tool for discovering truth. It's a defense mechanism against uncertainty.
A defense mechanism. Okay. So the smarter you are, the better you are at building a fortress of logic to hide from the chaos of reality.
Precisely. The philosopher and the scientist rely on predictable cause and effect. They try to map the universe so they can control it.
They want the ultimate spreadsheet.
Exactly. But the author views that heavy, burdensome logic as a cage. It's an artificial construct that completely severs us from our natural instincts, our lynxing.
Because an immortal operates on this, like, pre-verbal intuitive frequency.
Right. They do not pause to ask, wait, what if I get scammed? What will society think of me? What if this decision leads to starvation?
Which sounds completely insane to a rational person. Like, not asking, what if I starve, is exactly how you starve.
But the immortal doesn't ask that question because they have fully internalized a deeply uncomfortable truth about human existence.
Yeah.
A truth that all of our philosophy, science, and 401k portfolios are desperately designed to help us ignore.
You're talking about the death row metaphor.
Yes. The author states plainly that every single human being is essentially on death row. The only difference between any of us is our execution date.
Man, that is a brutally stark way to frame human life.
It is brutal, yeah. But it's mathematically undeniable. And understanding this completely changes the calculus of risk.
How so?
Well, the rational person, the shrewd planner, is spending their entire life frantically trying to negotiate with the executioner. They are hoarding umbrellas in a prison cell.
Oh, wow. Because if they just get the spreadsheet perfect, maybe they won't die.
Subconsciously, yes. They are burning massive amounts of caloric and emotional energy simulating worst-case scenarios to avoid an outcome that is already 100% guaranteed.
While the immortal, on the other hand, just accepts the reality of death row.
Right. If their execution date is tomorrow, it's tomorrow. If they starve, they starve. If they die, they die.
And because they've dropped that exhausting burden of trying to outsmart death, all of that cognitive energy is suddenly freed up.
Exactly. They are the only ones actually living the days they have left.
That completely flips the concept of analysis paralysis. You know, usually we think the smartest person in the room is paralyzed because they can see all the subtle variables and potential pitfalls that normal people miss.
Right. We think they're just too smart.
Yeah, but the author is saying they're paralyzed because their intellect is actually a form of cowardice. They are terrified of the uncontrollable nature of reality, so they just hide in their mind.
The intellect demands guarantees before it will act. But reality offers zero guarantees. Therefore, the pure intellectual is forever stuck in the waiting room.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If we actually accept this premise, if we drop the elaborate spreadsheets, step out of the waiting room, and accept that our execution date is coming regardless of how many umbrellas we carry, how does this philosophy translate into day-to-day existence?
This is where the concept of the Tao, or the natural law of the universe, really comes into play. The author argues that no matter how smart humans think they are, we are inherently limited. We're like frogs in a well.
Frogs in a well. I love that image. We look up, see a tiny circle of sky, and arrogantly assume we understand the entire universe.
And because we think we understand it, we try to manipulate it. We constantly try to game the system through our pros and cons lists.
But the author points out that weighing pros and cons ultimately just leads to zero-sum games, right?
Exactly. The text notes that gaining in the East means losing in the West. If you scheme, lie, or relentlessly optimize to gain some unnatural advantage in human affairs, the system always self-corrects. You will inevitably suffer a corresponding loss from the heavenly Tao.
The essay uses this great phrase, people bully the kind, but heaven doesn't. People fear the wicked, but heaven doesn't.
It really exposes how flimsy human social dynamics are.
Yeah, like you might outsmart your coworker for a promotion, or manipulate a situation to protect your ego, and you think you've won. But the universe doesn't care about your corporate title.
Not at all. The fundamental laws of nature are entirely unimpressed by human shrewdness, and nature provides the ultimate blueprint for how to exist without this toxic calculation.
He points to the natural world, right? Like
Yeah.
birds flying freely in the forest or flowers blooming in the fields.
Exactly. A flower doesn't run a risk analysis on the soil acidity before deciding to bloom. A bird doesn't secure a backup nest before it takes flight.
And the author asks this really pointed question. Are humans inferior to them?
We've traded the effortless grace of natural instinct for the chronic anxiety of micromanagement. So the author's ultimate prescription for life is a complete inversion of what modern society tells us to do.
He says we should strive to be foolish and simple rather than shrewd and complex.
Yes. He advises us to just hand our lives over to the Tao, or God, or nature, to manage.
He says we should walk, stop, create, roam freely, letting go and going with the flow. Now, conceptually, that sounds incredibly liberating. But practically, it sounds terrifying.
Oh, totally terrifying.
Like being foolish in a hyper-competitive capitalist society usually gets you crushed. Are we supposed to just wing it and hope the universe catches us?
It's vital to define what he means by foolish here. He does not mean being ignorant, incompetent, or intentionally self-destructive.
Right, remember, he already condemned the lazy person waiting for pies to fall from the sky.
Exactly, you still have to clear the inbox. Being foolish in this context just means shedding the predictive engine of your brain. It means actively refusing to play the zero-sum game of human calculation.
So when you stop trying to manipulate every variable, you stop fighting the current. You align yourself with the natural flow of life.
It's basically reallocating your mental RAM.
Yeah.
You're taking all the background processing power that was dedicated to anxiety, plotting, and risk assessment, and you're plugging it entirely into the present physical moment.
And the psychological relief of that has to be staggering.
It's immense. The burden of constantly trying to outsmart the universe is what makes life feel so heavy. When you admit that you are just a frog in a well, you stop trying to control the water level.
You realize there's an entire, terrifying, beautiful ocean functioning perfectly well without your input.
Precisely.
It really is a radical dismantling of how we are taught to measure success. I mean, we started by seeing how our obsession with safety, our raincoats and umbrellas, actually guarantees that we remain stagnant.
Right. We had to confront the uncomfortable reality that deferring our lives to tomorrow is really just a coping mechanism for the fear of today.
And we wrestled with the deep friction of the author's anti-intellectualism. This idea that our prized rationality, the very tool we're using to analyze this text, might actually be the cage that keeps us from experiencing reality organically.
It challenges us to look at our logic not as a superpower, but as a potential barrier to instinct.
Which ultimately leads to the freedom of surrender. Accepting the death row reality, not with despair, but with this profound lightness of knowing the zero-sum game is rigged anyway.
So you might as well stop playing and just live. You know, in an era characterized by relentless information overload, where every single algorithm, article, and advertisement is screaming at you to optimize your routine.
Right. Hedge your bets, secure your future.
Exactly. In that environment, this ancient-sounding philosophy is incredibly abrasive. It cuts through the noise with a completely counterintuitive premise.
What if the absolute most optimal way to live your life is to finally stop trying to optimize it?
What if the sheer exhaustion of trying not to lose is the only thing preventing you from actually experiencing the game?
Man, that is a framework that forces you to look at your daily decisions differently. So as you go back to your day, we want to leave you with a final thought to examine on your own.
Something to really mull over.
Yeah. If the author's core premise holds true, if we're all essentially on the same inevitable trajectory, and our elaborate matrices of backup plans are nothing more than heavy, exhausting illusions of control.
What is one specific raincoat or umbrella in your life right now?
Look closely at your routines, your career, or your relationships. What is that one redundant piece of safety gear you are clutching onto out of pure, calculated fear, which might actually be the exact thing keeping you from truly living today?